Welcome to Hashtag Wednesdays Weekly, a weekly information session in collaboration with the voluntary sector and public sector partners. Today's session is Toxic Debt, Creating a Community Response, and our hosts are John, Leon and Bawale. Over to you, guys.
Okay, I'm just trying to share my screen. I don't know what you can see. Oh, I'm going to try again, sorry. I'm currently failing.
You did share it a moment ago, it was fine.
Ah, it didn't look fine on mine. Sorry, 1 second. I seem to have managed to close it. Try and imagine that I'm trying to build up the excitement for when it does start. Right, let's try again.
Yeah, can see it now.
Okay, so last week, those of you who were with us, we looked quite closely at the challenges of toxic debt, its definition and the causes, pretty much at a national scale. We recognise that while it's an issue across communities, it disproportionately hits single parent families, ethnic minority communities, disabled people, and of course, people from deindustrialised communities. So something that's very, very relevant to the area we're in. Today, we're going to explore what can be done locally to mitigate the impact of toxic debt and reduce the pressures that push people into debt. Much of today will be you working through a series of questions, possibly in smaller groups. We'll make a decision in a little while about that. But just to give you an overview, what myself and Leon are going to talk about just in the first 10 minutes or so. We've got 6 questions we think are worth exploring. What are the causes of toxic debt in this community, not on a national level, but actually in this community? Which decision makers have the power to address these causes? Who are our people when addressing toxic debt? And what keeps our people apart? What resources are available? And what are the immediate tasks? So let's see if we can dip into that. So in this slide, we're looking at some of the big national issues. Some of these came up last week, the withdrawal of the uplift to universal credit. The fact that some people have never been in debt before are suddenly find themselves in debt and have no experience of how to navigate that. And of course, the energy price inflation that's going through the roof, and to some degree, the state of local commodities. These may be a combination of these. At a local level, the causes may be a combination of these national trends, but with local impacts. We're particularly keen to unpack what's happening locally, because local campaigning is most likely to be effective if the decision makers are actually part of the community. Now, one way of thinking about causes is what we call the fishbone exercise. If you draw a fish skeleton, you can label the head as the problem, and you can see at the top there, there's the blue lines represent different categories of causes, and then the sub-causes there. So, for example, you might say that low wages was a category of causes, or a failings in the benefit system, or a lack of financial literacy. These might be categories. And these categories are the main bones of the skeleton, and of them are individual causes that contribute to that category. So, for example, you may say that loss of industry and the rise of service sector jobs was one cause of low pay. You also might say that competition from cheap imports is a cause of low pay. It's up to you, really. The key is to identify the main categories of causes and then the sub-causes within them. So next is identifying decision makers. So toxic debt is not like the English weather. It's not something that no one has control over. It may be that toxic debt has multiple causes, but each one of those causes will be the result of a decision made somewhere, maybe to close a factory or to raise the rent. maybe to deny mainstream loans to people with certain historical debt issues, or a refusal to pay a cost of living wage increase. Whatever it is, someone made a decision. We've suggested some people in this slide who make these decisions, but you will know of others. People who make decisions that impact on the lives of people at risk of toxic debt. If we can name them and the bad decisions they make, we can seek to get them to make different decisions. Which brings us to the other side of the equation, in a sense. Who are our people? Now, before you go any further, you need to look at who our people are. This is not automatically people who already agree with us, but they are the people who should be in agreement with us. I suspect that people in debt will share our objective of reducing toxic debt, but there must be others, perhaps local elected councillors, trade unions, student groups, faith leaders. Is it possible that there may be unexpected allies as well? For example, the local Chamber of Commerce may be passionate about getting the local economy moving and support efforts to see structural changes, and they can become an ally in addressing this issue of toxic debt. Social housing providers are an interesting one. Traditionally, they would employ a significant number of staff to prepare court cases against tenants in arrears. Often those tenants will be vulnerable people who the local authority had a duty to rehouse. More recently, some providers have realised it's more cost effective to finance debt advice than it is to seek evictions for rent arrears. It is this creative thinking that can provide hope at a local level. Oh, and by the way, those social housing providers tend to have spare office and community space. Which brings us to the question of what keeps us apart. We looked at our people, and you will probably find quite a lot of different groups who are interested in addressing this problem. So why are they not working together? There may be many reasons. One might be that they have fairly inflexible ways of working. Trade unions, for example, tend to think their primary focus is on the workplace. And although they are concerned about toxic debt, really don't know how to navigate the community space. And of course, some people are artificially divided along lines of race, religion, and refugee status. These narratives of division can keep people apart when it's in their interest to actually reach out and work together. So a big question is, what's keeping this community apart and what can be done about it? I'm just going to hand over to Leon to take us through the next section of the presentation.
Thank you for that, John. So what resources are there available to actually address the issue of toxic debt or problem debt? So now, once you've begun to think about who your people are, the next question is, what resources are available? Are they human resources? People with the time and energy to perhaps help us solve the issue. But beyond that, resources could include, financial resources, so sources of funding available to the community. Are there material resources, meeting rooms, and other venues where people can meet and perhaps organise? What about social capital resources as well? Who do we know that can aid us? Who do we know that can influence decision makers? And of course, academic resources. Who is working on issues of poverty and exclusion at a local university? Can they be encouraged to work with us to find solutions? And that again takes us back to the fishbone exercise. So now that we've identified people, whether they be trade union members, religious leaders or organisations, debt advice organisations, counsellors or community leaders, we can now work out which interventions are realistic and likely to be effective. So obviously there's no point trying to move something that you cannot move, but you can find a position where your combined resources can create movement. Then that is where you want to focus your energy instead of kind of banging your head against a brick wall. It's not very rewarding, and it's not likely to build kind of any confidence. I just add to that by saying that so whether someone's opposed to you or whether they are ambivalent to you is about shifting them to a position where they either support your action or what you're trying to do, or whether you convince them not to oppose you. So that now brings me on to what are the first things that we need to do? So who do we need to ask and what do we need to get them to do? So is it declaring a debt emergency? Is it getting them to provide additional funding to advice centres? You know, whether that be citizen advice or other debt organisations, or is that helping with the provision of accommodation? So, you know, is that sort of helping about accommodation which is perhaps a little bit cheaper than the current private renter sector maybe? So what we're going to do is we're just going to have a discussion about the questions that you see on the screen, and then just have a bit more of a kind of a structured discussion after that. So what are the causes of toxic debt in this community? Which decision makers have the power to address these causes? Who are our people when addressing toxic debt? What keeps us apart? So what divides us as a community? What resources are available? So whether that be material resources, funding, expertise, etc. And what do we want to achieve immediately?
Thank you, Leon. I think given the numbers we've got here, it's probably not worth breaking into two smaller groups, but maybe just taking that discussion as we are. Are people happy to just work through those questions to explore them? Okay,
I'll just pause the recording.